Hello, my name is Thomas Healy, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hylion. So to kick off the presentation, the overview that we're going to be going through is electrification and how electrification is coming to the trucking industry. And as this audience knows better than anyone else, electrification is the wave of the future for this industry. We're going to move towards electrified trucks. But the big question is really, where's that electricity going to come from in order to power these vehicles? So as we look at moving towards electrified solutions, there's really three types of vehicles that the industry is considering. We've got the fully electric vehicles, which are like the Tesla plug-in truck. We've got fully electric hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which use hydrogen locally on board in order to produce electricity through a fuel cell on the vehicle. As well as we've got fully electric natural gas trucks, which is where Hyliion is focused. And this powertrain uses an onboard natural gas generator in order to be able to produce electricity on the vehicle and charge the batteries while you're going. And so throughout this presentation, we're really going to chat about what this shift towards electrification looks like and what are the pros and cons of each one of these solutions. So to kick it off, I just wanted to share a little bit more about Hyliion and what we do as an organization. So we're a company, we actually recently just started publicly trading on the New York Stock Exchange a few weeks ago here. And our whole focus as a company is bringing electrified solutions to the commercial vehicle space. We are located down here in Austin, Texas, and there's a few things that are really unique about what we're doing, but to mention a few of them, one is that our approach is we're focused on the powertrain. So we're not trying to reinvent the entire vehicle. We really see the area for opportunity is to come in and redo the powertrain of the truck as opposed to the whole vehicle from the ground up. And as mentioned before, the focus is electrification, bringing electrification solutions to the market. We already have some solutions that we're shipping to some fleets across the country. And ultimately, the goal here is that we're driving towards a cleaner planet. We're reducing emissions. We're making these trucks cleaner and better for the environment. So the state of alternative fueling, I mean, we're in a position right now where 90-something% of the trucks that are out on the road are run off of diesel. And there's a ton of discussion about electrification right now and a ton of energy and effort going towards developing electrified vehicles. But we're just at the early rollout stage of these solutions. And as mentioned in the kind of kickoff of this presentation, there's really three types of solutions that are coming forward. You've got, plug-in, hydrogen fuel cell, and natural gas electric. And so as we look at these three types of solutions, the way Hyliion is kind of approaching is saying, the number one most important thing is infrastructure, because when you take an electric truck, you really need to consider where are you going to refuel or recharge that vehicle? And from a practical standpoint, how are you going to do it? And once you can figure out infrastructure, then you can start looking at things like what's the actual cost of operation and what are the actual emissions that come from the vehicle. So to kick things off, we wanted to share a quick diagram here that shows what's kind of the progression of actually making this fuel, right? Because we hear a lot of times that, if you run a fully electric truck that plugs into the grid, it's a totally clean and, low-cost solution. And while that can be true if you're sourcing all of your electricity from wind and solar or hydro, the reality is across the U.S., not much of the fuel actually comes from those clean renewable sources. A lot of it is coming from coal, a lot of it from natural gas, and some even from nuclear, right? I mean, it's a big spread across the US of where the electricity comes from. And so this graph just kind of shows, how we looked at it, where, with natural gas, you have this unique fuel source of renewable natural gas, which is something that is sometimes overlooked in the industry, which is really a process of capturing methane coming off of landfills and dairy farms, and then capturing that and being able to put it into the pipelines that then ultimately provide the fuel that will go in these trucks. And so renewable natural gas has some really unique properties, including being, potentially net carbon negative for the environment, which means not only is it, get you to zero emissions, it actually gets you below zero, because that methane would have normally just been gassing off into the atmosphere and creating pollutants coming off of these, places like landfills. Versus if we can capture it and run it in a vehicle, the emissions that come out of that tailpipe are a lot cleaner than what the methane just coming off of the landfill would have been producing. So the other big benefit with RNG is that, as mentioned before, that gets pumped right into the pipelines. And we've got a natural gas infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure set up all across the U.S. And, many of the states here in the U.S. have quick and easy access to natural gas. And then ultimately, you set up a refueling station that taps into that natural gas pipeline, and now you can refuel your vehicle off of that. When you look at electricity, as widely known, I mean, everyone here in the U.S. knows there is an electric grid infrastructure set up, but the question is, can that grid really support electric semi-trucks? There was a study that was actually done that showed 2 mega chargers, the Tesla chargers, to be able to recharge their electric semis when they're doing a fast recharge, actually consume more electricity than the entire Western Star manufacturing plant. So 2 rechargers is more than an entire truck manufacturing plant. And so that's putting these vehicles on the grid is a huge demand load for being able to supply that much electricity. We've even had some conversations with fleets where they've gone to their utility providers. Some have just been told, there isn't that much excess electricity. We've heard from others that they can get that much electricity, but they need to redo the transformers and all the lines coming into their facility. And we've heard quotes up to $30 million to do that sort of an infrastructure change. Now, with that being said, there are some areas where cheap and renewable electricity is abundantly available, and that makes a ton of sense to use that for electric semis. And then the last one is hydrogen fuel cells. Often thought of as kind of a very clean fuel source for vehicles. But the reality is right now, a lot of the fuel, a lot of the hydrogen that is produced here in the US is actually coming from steam methane reforming, which in many instances is actually a more pollutive fuel source, more pollutive than just even running a conventional diesel truck. So when you get to that sort of metrics, it's like it wouldn't make sense to use a hydrogen plant that is a extremely pollutive source, and then produce that hydrogen to run it in a zero emissions vehicle. So now there are clean sources of hydrogen. There's electrolysis, which does require you to have clean renewable energy in order to produce that hydrogen. But it is possible to kind of create that zero emission hydrogen. But it's a very, very small segment of the hydrogen that's made today comes from those type of sources. Then ultimately the hydrogen needs to be distributed to a refueling station, and that refueling station needs to be produced and created. Right now, there is not a pipeline set up across the US for hydrogen. So either that infrastructure to be able to move hydrogen around would need to be made, or we're going to be shipping it in trucks, or we'll have to produce it locally at the fueling station. So a lot of infrastructure costs and setup that still needs to happen in order to make hydrogen achievable. And then ultimately, that's just one part of the equation is infrastructure. And then, you really have to then go look at what's the actual cost of getting that fuel. So with RNG CNG, we're seeing fleets that, are buying fuel at $1 per diesel gallon equivalent. With the electric grid, we actually source these numbers from Tesla. If you go plug in a Model S or Model 3 right now at a supercharger, you're going to be getting charged about $7.26 per diesel gallon equivalent of recharging your car with or your truck with electricity. And then the last one, hydrogen. Hydrogen costs are still very high right now. It's at about $11.90 per diesel gallon equivalent. So one of the huge benefits we see with RNG CNG is that low cost, and it's there today. Now, jumping forward to the next slide here, there are future projections of lower cost hydrogen and lower cost electricity. You can see some of these on the graph on the left, but one of the unique things with RNG CNG is not only is it at that price point today, but it's already significantly lower than even what the future projections of hydrogen and electricity are projected to be. So a lot of benefits from the cost side. Then when you look at fueling infrastructure in the middle of this table, There's already over 700 natural gas refueling stations set up across the US, versus for hydrogen and for electric, that infrastructure has not been established yet. And just taking some of the metrics that are publicly available out there, if you wanted to produce the same number of hydrogen stations that there are already natural gas stations, it would be about a $12 billion endeavor to go do so. So a lot of capital expense would be needed to be infused into being able to set up that type of network. And then lastly, it comes down to emissions. So as mentioned on the previous slide, these vehicles, even though they have zero tailpipe emissions, it does not mean that they're kind of well to wheel is really zero emissions. So when we're looking at kind of emissions of the vehicle, we try to step back and look at, well, where did that fuel actually come from, and how much emissions was produced all the way through to actually being able to drive the vehicle. And so with hydrogen, as mentioned on the last slide, a lot of it's coming from steam methane reforming, which can be more pollutive than diesel. With the grid, some of it's coming from those clean sources that have zero emissions, but others are pollutive. Like a coal power plant produces a lot of emissions. Versus when you move to RNG, renewable natural gas, it has that savings over diesel, but it actually has the opportunity to get down to pretty significant net carbon negative emissions profiles, depending on where that electricity is, or where that natural gas or renewable natural gas is sourced from. And the last thing to add on this slide is there's a lot of discussions of using natural gas or renewable natural gas in order to produce hydrogen or produce electricity. One of the things that we looked at was, well, if you take renewable natural gas and then you convert that into electricity for the grid or convert that into hydrogen, there's an efficiency loss there, right? I mean, there's no way to convert something from natural gas into hydrogen without losing some of that energy. And so from that standpoint, we looked at it as you're better off just taking that fuel source, that clean fuel source, and moving it right into the vehicle and producing the electricity locally, as opposed to going through all those transformations of producing hydrogen, then refueling the vehicle with hydrogen, then producing electricity on the truck to then drive the vehicle. There's a lot of efficiency losses in that process. So that's where our philosophy was: just put the natural gas right in the vehicle and produce the electricity locally. And then lastly, a little bit more about RNG is, the infrastructure is already set up across the US here. So there are over 700 stations already out there. And, these stations are already designed for Class 8 semi-trucks. And one of the really unique things is that a lot of this fuel that is being used at these CNG stations is already coming from RNG, or renewable sources. Natural Gas Vehicles America actually did a study that just about 40% of the fuel used today at stations is actually coming from RNG. So, RNG is not kind of this pipe dream that, a couple of percent here and there are actually using it. It's an abundant fuel source. And in California, I think it's even in, closer to the 70–80% of the fuel used at natural gas stations is coming from RNG. So it's here today and it's growing. As you can see from the infographic, there's 110 RNG production facilities that are already operating, and there's close to 100 more that are in development or already under construction. So we're coming close to almost going to be doubling the amount of RNG production in the years ahead here. So then to wrap things up is just talk a little bit about RNG, where it is today in vehicles and in the future. So CNG vehicles are out there. There are many fleets that are converting over to natural gas. There are many fleets that also tried natural gas and experienced issues with it. And I think a lot of those issues have started to be overcome in terms of maintenance costs. But one of the issues that's still out there is just natural gas vehicles are underpowered compared to diesel. So one of our products is our hybrid electric solution that we can actually put on a natural gas vehicle, and it adds more horsepower and torque to the truck so it can perform more equivalent to a diesel truck. And then as we look forward in the future, we've unveiled our Hypertruck ERX solution, which is that fully electric vehicle that recharges on natural gas locally. We're super excited to be getting this out to the market here. We'll be doing initial deliveries in 2021 to some fleets, but our initial pre-order customer is Agility Global Logistics. They came in and placed a 1,000-unit truck order. And the reason I wanted to share Agility was because they had a very fascinating and unique way of looking at clean, renewable fuel sources to run their trucks. So for them, they are shipping goods for a lot of the well-known B2C brands that are out across the globe. And for Agility, they looked at it as they could shift to the Hypertruck solution and have a significant reduction in the amount of emissions that comes from that vehicle, if not even get it to net carbon negative. And then they can pass those emission savings, those credits, onto the actual fleet or the actual company that they're shipping for. So that way, let's take a company like Amazon, for instance. They've been very vocal about how by 2040, they're going to get to net carbon zero for their entire company. Well, if an Agility was shipping for Amazon, they could take those emission savings and actually pass it back for Amazon to be able to take credit for it to move towards their climate initiative. But then for Agility, being the actual shipper, they have the benefit of moving to a low-cost solution, as well as the benefit of not needing to go out and set up a ton of infrastructure in order to be able to already start running these vehicles, since that infrastructure is already built out. So it's really a double win. It's a win for the company that Agility is shipping for, as well as a win for Agility from a cost and infrastructure standpoint. So with that, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to, a little bit of an overview on kind of where renewable natural gas is today, how it's being used in the trucking industry, and some of the statistics around it as to where we really see it as the right fuel solution for enabling electrified vehicles going forward. And with that, I'd love to kind of transition over to any Q&A that you all might have.